Hello, I'm Froylán Hernández, and I am the Desert Bighorn Sheep Program Leader for Texas Parks and Wildlife. And I appreciate the opportunity to present to you. Hopefully, I'll maintain your interest and you'll stay till the end. Just a quick overview of what I'll be covering. That is a brief history of the Desert Bighorn Sheep restoration, recent restoration efforts, Aoudad populations, and the challenges presented by those populations. Back in the late 1800s and more accurately the 1880s, it was estimated there were approximately 1,500 bighorns occupying about 17 mountain ranges. Prior to the 1880s, it's believed that there were about 2,500 and maybe even up to 3,000 animals. However, by the early 1960s, they were all gone. Some of the things that contributed to their extirpation include unregulated hunting, meaning people could hunt them at will, the introduction of domestic livestock, primarily sheep and goats, and diseases carried by those animals that bighorns had not been exposed to. Net wire fencing, also associated with domestic sheep and goat industry, which prevented bighorn movement and resource competition, among others. Uh, Early restoration efforts focused primarily on captive propagation. There were breeding facilities built in the Sierra Diablo, the beach, the Sierra Vieja Mountains, as well as Black Gap Wildlife Management Area. However, now we uh, exclusively use free-ranging broodstock, and one site that has been extremely productive is Elephant Mountain Wildlife Management Area. Uh, this is just a summary of recent translocations, and since 2010, we've been pretty active and have captured and translocated nearly 500 animals. 70% of those were fitted with radio collars to help with the post-release monitoring as well as for research purposes to guide our management decisions. As I said, uh, most of the broodstock has come from Elephant Mountain Wildlife Management Area. However, we also have also used broodstock from Sierra Diablo Beach and the Baylor Mountains. Through these efforts, we've been able to restore the Bofecillos Mountains in Big Bend Ranch State Park, Nine Point Mesa, south of Alpine, and Capote Peak, which is a spur off of the Sierra Vieja Mountains. These areas all had been void of bighorns for over 60 years. Currently, there are about 1,500 animals in about 11 different mountain ranges. And while we have seen progress, uh, there have also been many challenges. And the Aoudad is a challenge which has been growing in size as well as in complexity. As y'all may know, the Aoudad is an exotic ungulate that comes from the arid mountains in the Barbary Coast of northern Africa. They were first introduced into the Palo Duro Canyon back in the late 1950s, and at that time, I don't think anybody envisioned that they would do so well. They have since uh, established themselves in the Trans-Pecos as well as central and Texas and other parts of Texas. We typically keep account on Aoudad seen during annual bighorn surveys. However, our main focus during bighorn surveys is obviously looking for bighorn. Uh, so in 2018, we decided to take a closer look into Aoudad populations, a few mountain ranges where we knew had high numbers, as well as mountain ranges in Mexico. And what we found was surprising to say the least. We counted nearly 4,000 Aoudad in those three mountain ranges. In the Chinati Mountains, we flew a little over 9 hours, and we were counting over 220 sheep per hour, which is considerably high. In Mexico, we counted considerably less. However, Aoudad are taking hold there also. Um, Notice that the Sierra Vieja was an incomplete survey. Had we surveyed the entire mountain range, the total count would have been closer to 5,000. And that is, 3 times as many Aoudad on those three mountain ranges as there are bighorns on 11 mountain ranges. And so we knew that there were lots of Aoudad in those mountain ranges, just not that many, and certainly not in those heavy concentrations. And so those heavy concentrations have negative impacts uh, on the landscape uh, and on the resources, or native resources, including resource competition, habitat degradation, reduction of usable habitat, and potentially the disease threats, among. So the first thing that comes to mind in competition is for food and water. And as you can see here on these silk tassel plants, there's a clear browse line from heavy use. And this browse line is evident in most plants, along the slopes, which is indicative of a very heavy use. And prolonged heavy use, over time, it will compromise a plant's resiliency. And in time, those plants, eventually die. And with that, the eventual decline of the habitat. This here is four-winged saltbush, which is not one of the most palatable plants out there. But here you can see the hedging effect from overuse. And, if this is occurring uh, on this plant, it's a good indication that the more nutritious plants are scarce or maybe even gone. And, that obviously, renders the habitat, just unhealthy. Now, because Aoudad are more of a habitat generalist, meaning they can use habitats pretty much uniformly. Once the habitat is no longer usable to them, those Aoudad can move on to other places. Whereas bighorn are more of a specialist, a habitat specialist. So they are forced to stay and deal with the less usable habitat. This naturally impacts their reproductive potential as well as their survival. And in addition to all that, uh, Audads also pose a disease threat. We've taken tissue samples from over 120 Aoudad in the Sierra Vieja, the Chinati Mountains, Van Horns, the Quitmans, as well as from Elephant Mountain Wildlife Management Area and Black Gap Wildlife Management Area. And we've submitted those samples to TVMDL, which is our Texas Diagnostic Lab, as well as WADL, which is the Washington State Lab, and they are considered the leaders in bighorn testing. Now, some of the results that we are finding is that they carry, or Aoudad carry, some of the similar diseases as our native species do, such as blue tongue and EHD. However, more recently, we found a pathogen associated to pneumonia die-offs in bighorns throughout the western states, which is concerning. And so we partnered with Dr. Walt Cook from the A&M School of Veterinary Medicine to see if the Aoudad can not only get infected with this pathogen and show those clinical signs of illness, but also and more importantly transmit the pathogen to bighorns. And then right now we are in the initial stages of the study, and it's turning out to be pretty promising. To look into these competition and interaction issues a little closer, we initiated a study in the Van Horn Mountains in January of 2019 and collared 40 Aoudad, 40 Bighorn, and 40 mule deer. We're essentially in our first year so far, and some of the findings are turning out to be interesting. Excuse me, Dr. Carlos Gonzalez with Sul Ross State University and BRI is helping out with the project, and we are looking at habitat use. And this is a slide put together by Dr. Gonzalez. And the shaded area you see here on this map is a better type or a better habitat, the better bighorn habitat. And so those dots are actual collar locations from Aoudad and Bighorn. And as you can see, Aoudad occupy the better habitat, and the Bighorn seem to occupy the lesser quality or suboptimal habitat. And so this suggests that bighorns are being displaced. Again, we are in our first year of the study, and so the further we go on with it, the more we will hopefully learn. But it certainly appears that bighorns are being displaced from that better quality type of habitat. Daniel Wilcox is a graduate student on the project, and it's also looking at other variables. And this is simulation based on available Aoudad literature, which suggests Aoudad have an ecological or a biological advantage. In other words, they have an earlier breeding age. Their ability to twin is a little higher. While bighorns are capable of twinning, they rarely twin, and it seems that Aoudad they can twin frequently. Aoudad also have a higher survival, and the breeding frequency is more often. In other words, they tend to, it appears that they have at least 2 and sometimes even 3 breeding cycles per year. Now, this model shows how quickly an Aoudad herd can grow in a relatively short amount of time. If Aoudad and Bighorn begin with a group size of, say, 50, for example, or as this example shows, Aoudad can potentially outnumber Bighorn by a factor of 7 in 10 years. And this kind of helps explain the high densities seen on the landscape that we see out here. And as if the biological advantages, weren't enough, we have other challenges to contend with, and that is an economical or financial component to the challenges. And by that, I mean, Aoudad hunting. Aoudad hunting has been growing in popularity, and the hunt that once cost a few $100s are now going for $5,000, and that's on the lower end, and they can go up to $7,000. So if a landowner has 12 hunts, for example, that's potentially $60,000 of supplemental income. And and I get it. How can I ask a landowner to get rid of the Aoudad when they can make him, this kind of money? They can be hunted year-round because they're an exotic, and are essentially, an unlimited resources because of the high densities that occur out here. I was once told by a landowner that if not for Aoudad hunts, he'd have just a real hard time making ends meet on ranching alone during bad years. And so again, because of this, I get it. And so here's a short video clip of Aoudad group sizes we often encounter during surveys, and there's certainly quite a few of them. Again, lots and lots of animals in herds of excess of 200 or more. So the Aoudad issue is one we must take head on. Uh, we're at a point where these issues must be addressed, and as we move forward with restoration and management of our native species, we must acknowledge that Aoudad are here to stay, and not just because of the extremely high densities, but also because of the financial incentive and supplemental income presented to landowners. And so, as we move forward, I hope we can, work together and find a solution that works for everyone. And well, that wasn't too long. I hope it wasn't too terrible. When we got to the end of this, and here's my contact info. If you have any questions or comments, please email me, and I'll gladly try to answer them to the best I can. Again, thank you for your time and for your interest.